This episode of This Non-Religious Life brought to you by Audible.com. And we're not going to do the typical, you should go to Audible and get this cool stuff, because it is cool. You should definitely do that. But I wanted to kind of give you a background of why we're doing this. As you know, if you've been a listener to This Non-Religious Life for a while, you know that we are trying to grow the show. We're trying to make it where we can do live broadcast every time we record, so you can interact with us as we record the show, and if so, you can put your input and everything. So our next step on that, I'm testing out software now. Our next step is I'm actually raising $450 so I can buy this software that I've decided that we're going to use, and that will be beneficial for Zombie Popcorn and this show. And I thought about this for a long time. I was like, wait a minute. I need to raise this money. I've been paying for everything out of my pocket. But I do not want the listeners to have to, I don't want to ask the listeners and the readers of Zombie Popcorn to actually give us money. So I thought about it, and I said, what we can do is, Audible can be our sponsor, and it doesn't cost you anything. All you have to do is go and do the 30-day trial through audibletrial.com/TNRL. If you go through there and sign up for the 30-day free trial, you get something free. You get the free trial, and you get a free download, and you help us get to our goal of updating our software. So please take a moment during this show and go to audibletrial.com/TNRL. Thanks.
Jesus got out here.
I thought I was a good Christian.
Jesus died on a cross. I go to church every Sunday. Jesus got out here. Then I read that because Jesus died on a cross for a rotten hooker.
I thought I was a good Christian.
I go to church every Sunday.
I thought I was a good Christian.
I go to church every Sunday. I'm a very religious person.
I thought I was a good Christian.
The very line the serpent told to Eve in the Garden of Eden. Garden of Eden. Garden of Eden. The gospel of Jesus Christ. Spread confusion and promote lies. The gospel of Jesus Christ. Spread confusion and promote lies. The gospel of Jesus Christ. Spread confusion and promote lies. The gospel of Jesus Christ. Spread confusion and promote lies. The gospel of Jesus Christ. Spread confusion.
Good morning, everybody. It is Monday, April 9th, 2012. This Non-Religious Life. I'm your host, Ken. All the way across the country, we have Bob.
How's it going?
And Jason.
Hello, how you doing?
And we have a pretty good show lined up today.
Just a
So,
pretty good one.
I'm
pretty
excited that
good.
we're going to get more.
Not phenomenal, not spectacular. Pretty good.
But listen anyway, because it's going to be pretty good.
Yeah, it'll be pretty good. You'll enjoy it.
Good times.
If not, Jason will mail you a check.
From Ken's checkbook.
Nope.
Are you kidding?
Good thing it's 2012 and I don't have a checkbook, huh? Who uses checks anymore anyway?
You brought it up. Anyway.
We do. Our landlady likes checks.
Really?
Yeah, it's weird.
Meh. I guess that's the only reason people ever use checks anymore. It's rent. So, what did you guys want to start with first? Do you want to go with our comment, or do you want to?
Yeah, I'd like to start today with a comment we got on the YouTube channel about last week's show, when we were sort of examining the Easter story, the whole Holy Week, day by day, and we got a comment from Mudflappus, and which is a great name. Thanks, Mudflappus. And they said, pointing about Jesus throwing the money changers out of the temple complex is thought to have been roughly 15 square acres in its entirety. That would be like Jesus beating the crap out of all of the people selling ride tickets at a state fair. Either Jesus was Rambo, or it just didn't quite happen the way it's told. Very aptly put, Mudflappus.
Yeah, I read that a couple days ago, and I was like, that's a really good point.
It's an excellent point.
The second temple was rather large. It's not like walking into a church today and being like, yanking a couple people out of by the doors and kicking them out. The second temple was a very large structure that had a series of outer line areas, and that's where it would have been. It would have been this within the retaining walls, but not within the temple complex itself. So, it's where people changed their money and got everything before they entered the temple proper, which is
15 square acres.
really big area.
Yeah, that's huge. 15 square acres is a lot. I never thought about it being that big. I always had this sort of preconceived notion that when they talked about the Second Temple, that it was just one big church. I didn't realize that it was a massive complex like that.
Yeah, I've actually heard Dr. Price deal with this before, and he was like, if this is true, then Jesus was an armed revolutionary. There's no way he could have done it by himself. So it's almost absolutely an exaggeration. Even if Jesus did exist, this story is a complete and utter exaggeration of something that might have happened, or it didn't happen at all.
Well, I mean, I always sort of try to think of it in the terms of the middle ground, and maybe he just made one guy go away. If there was a historical Jesus, maybe he just ousted one of the money changers that he happened to run into, if at all.
Yeah.
Which isn't how the story is told, but that's just me sort of...
Wouldn't that be so funny? I mean, that's a completely different story if he just went up to one guy and goes, "You got to get out of here."
Yeah.
He's like bullied to one person, and then the story just... I mean, I guess that's how it works. It's like that old game. You would whisper in somebody's ear, tell them something, and then they would whisper, and by the time it gets back around to you, it's a completely different story.
You've just illustrated the entire Christian faith right there.
Yeah, not just the Christian faith, just about every single one of them.
A game of Chinese whispers that started at about 1500 AD, or 1500 BC.
The longest running game in history.
No
Seriously. Some of these stories, like you read the Bible, some of those stories existed well before, written word. Some of them are older than cuneiform writing. They're certainly older than the Phoenician alphabet.
Well, isn't that an apologist standpoint that the stories were transmitted verbally for thousands of years before they were written down, but because they were gospel, they were transmitted perfectly? Yeah,
well, that's an apologist answer. The truth is, a lot of these stories were oral transmission. And there was an amount of, sacredness to them. So you oftentimes, with some of the stories, you had to learn them verbatim before you could transmit them. You see it in Buddhism, actually, with whole sutras where, a monk has to learn an entire sutra by heart before he's allowed to teach it. But with a lot of Judeo-Christian teachings, that's not the case. The Gospels, certainly, absolutely not the case. As you can tell by the glaring differences in the Gospels themselves. They're not internally consistent, which would be the mark of something that was perfectly preserved. They couldn't preserve it in writing, let alone in oral tradition.
I think that's a larger point, is that they couldn't preserve them via writing. How are we supposed to believe that they were preserved perfectly via oral transmission?
Yeah.
That doesn't follow.
Yeah, that's the thing. Memory sucks. There's a reason why, anyone who knows anything about forensics knows that an eyewitness account is one of the most unreliable things you can have. You don't necessarily remember things the way that they were. And that's especially so for things that are completely intangible, like stories. Things get changed. All it takes is a synonym of something, and you can change the entire meaning of something.
I just think it's interesting that's an apologist position, that we're expected to believe that it was transmitted perfectly, and that's their official answer. That's not a very good answer. And we're supposed to believe it's the power of God that allowed this to happen?
Absolutely. Well, because it's untestable. And apologists, their stock and trade is the untestable. All they have to do is come up with a theory that you can't verify or falsify, and they've got you. That's that's what it is. It's we can't explain it, therefore God did it.
Yeah.
Rather than we can't explain it, therefore let's figure it the fuck out.
Well, actually, that's gonna that'll be relevant to another item I want to talk about later. And you'll see. I don't know if you know about this or not, but we'll get to it. I also wanted to talk about this news story that's been making the rounds about Patrick Green. He is the atheist that became a Christian after believers show him compassion.
Yeah. This is one of those things that gets the media's attention when it probably shouldn't. Yes, he was an atheist. Yes, he converted to Christianity. They label him an activist because he threatened to sue, and the operative word is threatened, to sue his town because of a nativity scene that was placed on public property. Apparently, he liked to threaten to sue lots of people.
Yeah, but was he a member of any activist groups? Was he a member of Freedom from Religion? Do we know that?
The interesting thing about this is he's not a scientist. He's not a prolific author. He's not. He's at the head of some organization. He's a relative nobody. The groups in his area kind of knew who he was because he kind of liked to start things often, but most people consider him, from what I'm understanding from people who live in the area, kind of a whack job with a persecution complex.
Maybe.
He threatened to sue Ray Comfort over Ray Comfort's National Atheist Day bumper stickers. Do you remember that? He was trying to make April 1st National Atheist Day because...
Oh, really? I didn't know about that.
It says in the Bible, anyone who would deny that there is a God is a fool in his heart, or something like that. So April Fool's Day is National Atheist Day. So
that's pretty clever.
Nah, it is pretty good.
It's clever. It's clever. I'll give Ray Comfort that. Good old Banana Man. It's definitely good for a joke. Yeah, he threatened to sue him because he thought it was offensive, and he had a persecution complex.
Well, part of the story that I don't quite understand was they said that he was going to sue the Henderson County, which is in Texas, about the nativity scene, but then he dropped the lawsuit because he had a medical condition that was causing him to lose his sight. I don't understand why that caused him to drop the lawsuit.
He dropped the lawsuit, I believe, after he discovered that he had the problem, and there was a Christian group or a parish there that raised a lot of money to help fund his medical treatment.
Right, but I don't understand why. I mean, and that's great, and that's awesome that they did that. I mean, that shows a lot of compassion on their part, and which is good. But that's great. We should treat more people as well. But I don't see why he dropped the lawsuit when he found out his vision was failing, or was it he found out his vision was failing? They gave him a bunch of money, so quid pro quo, he dropped the lawsuit.
So they bought him off, is what you're saying?
I don't know. I'm not even making
it could be that. I mean, it could also be the fact that he was losing his eyesight and he just didn't care about the lawsuit anymore.
Maybe
bigger
Which
things.
That's fine too.
Which is fine, of course, absolutely. Your personal health should definitely be one of those things that you care about more than most things. But
yeah, well, so here's the thing about him too is I think that he they say in the news story he makes a statement that he says he wasn't able to reconcile the vast difference between all the animals and us, and he said that the theory of evolution didn't answer his questions, and I'm like, wow, because I think the theory of evolution perfectly answers those questions. I mean, it is an elegant theory. And I also think that this guy was one of those atheists who his stance was, there is no God, and I hate him.
Well, that could be it. It definitely sounds like perhaps he had a beef with organized religion rather than he thought the idea of a personal God was credulous. And it takes me to a point that I try to talk about with a lot of believers, is that atheism isn't a single belief. It's a spectrum of ideas. You know, there are lots of atheists for lots of different reasons. Now, personally, I find the idea of a personal God absolutely ridiculous. It is beyond credulous. It is, I want to say, borders on the absurd, but I think it's beyond that line. This guy probably just had a beef with organized religion. And so he identified with the group that he perceived as one lashing out against organized religion.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Well, I don't know. This the way this story.
You can call yourself an atheist for any number of reasons, but that doesn't mean that the conviction is equal to someone who might be a little more set in their ways and understand philosophies and science a little better.
I don't know. This sounds like the way this story has been presented and is set up reminds me of back when churches they kind of did tours, and they always had like 3 or 4 people who would get up on stage and talk about, and it seemed like every church had the same people. You know, they were dressed really hip and cool looking, and their stories always involved, I used to do a lot of drugs. I used to worship the devil. And I used to have a lot of sex until I found God, you know. And it was always this same cookie cutter story. The way this has been set up and presented by the media or whoever's pushing it, sounds like just a newer version of that cookie cutter.
Yeah, exactly. It's definitely the haha we win sort of strategy, where it's like, look at this guy. He was an atheist and an activist. He was hardcore. You know, he was, you know, Richard Dawkins on crack, you know, but he's a relative nobody. I mean, if you want to play the field like that, there was that pastor just recently who, you know, deconverted. She stepped down from her position as a preacher because she simply didn't have faith that there was a God.
Was that the woman?
You know, she's an atheist. It happens every day, and there are so many. With the way they teach you, you know, religion in seminary and in Bible colleges, anyone who even begins to get that, to let anything inside, is going to crack. You know, it happened to Bart Ehrman. It happened to Dr. Robert Price. It happened to so many people.
To Matt.
You know, Bishop John Shelby Spong is like, you know, he's hanging on by his fingernails.
Yeah. Well, I think that this guy, Patrick Green, I think he needs to read a science book or two.
Yeah, that's the thing. You know, he has questions about science that he hasn't answered, and I have a feeling that he's never really looked into it.
I think he's looked into it. He's just read the wrong ones. Isn't he from Texas?
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah,
There you go. The Texas textbooks again.
I heard the Texas textbooks are top notch.
Look at my education.
Yeah, I just, you know, this guy's being trotted out as this conversion poster child, and I don't think his atheism was founded in evidence and I don't know what's the better word, incredulity. It was more like he just had a lot of gaps, and now religion is filling them.
Yeah, exactly. You know, he had a preconceived notion of what organized religion was, and when that shattered, there's no more reason to cling to it, you know?
Yeah. He says he also wants to be a pastor, and I think...
Yeah, he wants to be a pastor now.
Yeah, I think maybe he's seeing dollar signs.
Maybe.
Well, maybe he's just seeing fame and attention. I mean, apparently, if what you say, Ken, is true, where he's just always kind of poking sticks at people and things, and he's just considered kind of a whack job, maybe he's just looking to grab a hold of something that's going to bring him attention.
Maybe.
And maybe that's the fame he wants.
I mean, you know, I've heard him described as someone who has the persecution complex, and believe me, no one plays the persecution complex better than Christians. So maybe he found all it takes is finding a like-minded flock to get in step with. So
Look at this show. No.
yeah.
Okay, so then the next news story that I thought would be fun to talk about, and I'm disappointed because it doesn't look like there were any deaths associated with this. But again, in the Philippines, we had this bloody Holy Week self-flagellation crucifixion thing going on.
Yeah. 20 people in the Philippines crucified themselves on Good Friday.
Oh my God! All right, so I want to state that I'm glad nobody died. I don't want anybody to die, but I just don't understand inflicting that kind of punishment on yourself.
Yeah, it's crazy on a scale that I can hardly even imagine, you know?
It's no different than those S&M parties.
What's that?
It's no different from those S&M parties where
I
people
don't
are
pretend
hanging
to
from
understand that
hooks
either.
from the ceiling and
Sure, you know, I used to
Genital
have friends that
tortures,
did
you know?
suspensions and all sorts of crazy stuff like that, heavy mods. And you're right, it is absolutely no different. It's a spiritual experience where inflicting pain does something, but it is that makes it no less crazy than it is, you know? Nailing yourself to a stick of wood and hanging yourself. Reading the Passion story, it's meant to illustrate the fact that Jesus was supposed to have died in one of the most humiliating and painful manners possible. Although, when you read the Passion story, he got out of it pretty quick. Crucifixion is a nasty business that takes days to die from. You die from suffocation, but it's a long drawn out process. Having your hands and feet nailed to a thing of wood definitely doesn't help.
Yeah, this is just really grim and gruesome, these pictures that are on the Huffington Post.
Oh, yeah. It happens every year. That's the thing. This year, 20 people. And here's the thing. The diocese there, the deacons and the bishops, definitely plead with people not to do it because it is dangerous. So it's one of those things where it's this insane act of faith on the penitent's part rather than something that's instructed from up on high that they have to do.
But this is not exclusive to Christianity. I mean, because in Thailand they have the vegetarian festival where people. I mean, if you go to zombiepopcorn.com right now and type in the search engine on the site vegetarian festival, you'll see photos of it. And this is where people. And the reason it's a vegetarian festival is because during this spiritual week, you're not allowed to eat meat or anything, so all the food's vegetarian. But what they do is they do parades, and they take these massive swords and needles and stuff and put it through their face, through their nose, it's hardcore. They even have this ladder that they've created that the steps are made out of razor blades, and you're supposed to climb up the top of it with weights hanging on you, all the way up to the top, all the way back down the other side during this. And this is supposed, and they say that they are filled full of, I forget the name of the spirit. I have to look it up. I can't remember it, but they're filled with the spirit, which causes them no pain and no suffering. And then once it's all over, there are no markings left on their body.
Well, you're not going to catch me doing that ever, and I don't understand how to do it. But their belief is that they're going to transcend suffering, right? Their belief is that because of their conviction that they transcend suffering. These guys in the Philippines are doing it in order to suffer.
Yeah.
They're inflicting pain upon their bodies and inflicting harm upon themselves in order to suffer like Christ did.
Well, I think I think the difference is one. It's just your perception of what the Spirit's going to do for you.
I guess. I mean, I don't know, man. The guy in the Tibetan festivals, he could be in extreme agony. I don't know. I mean, you're not going to catch me doing that either. But
Yeah. I've actually seen videos where, skeptic debunkers go there and they show, there's when they run the spike through their cheeks, the reason why there's no mark is when you take it out, the skin, it's a very, very tiny mark anyway, and the skin sort of seals up. The skin's very elastic.
But these are huge blades.
Yeah.
yeah, you're not going to catch me doing that. No way.
I thought we were doing that for the show.
It's no different than firewalking or...
Well, firewalking is a little different because firewalking is physics.
It is physics, but it's one of those things where, it's definitely a little dangerous, and the concept is that you can do it, and it's sort of a spiritual experience.
It's like the bed of nails.
That's physics still.
Yeah,
That's
I know.
more physics.
Yeah, it's like the bed of nails, and
that's different from driving a goddamn sword through your face.
Yeah. Well, the bed of nails
or
is
nailing
physics,
yourself
too,
to a
that's what
cross.
he's saying. Yeah.
It's weight distribution over a bunch of
Again,
points, which
physics.
those
Those guys that are doing that
significant
in
weight
carnival
is ever
shows,
on a single point. What these people are doing is no different than what happened in the Middle Ages with the flagellates who would beat themselves because they thought suffering in the world was finite. So if they suffered, fewer people had to suffer. This is a time during plagues and war and pestilence and famines and all those wonderful things.
Again, not going to catch me doing it.
Yeah.
No way. That looks like it might hurt.
Yeah.
Well, there goes my next idea for our next show that we're going to start.
I know, right? and so here's the thing, though. If somebody has a motivation to do that, awesome. I'm not going to get in your way. You can do it all you want, but I don't understand the desire to inflict suffering and pain upon yourself to honor someone else's supposed pain and suffering.
But isn't that the foundation of Christian belief? Is the more you suffer, the more you care.
I don't know. That's a messed up doctrine, if you ask me. And I always thought that the story was like Jesus suffered, so you don't have to.
But I also thought Christians, they were supposed to sacrifice. I mean, like self-sacrifice and suffering is one of the key ingredients to be a true Christian.
That's said by the same guy that says, dig into your pockets and give till it hurts.
Yeah. Well, no, I'm just trying to...
Yeah.
Of course you could say that. Again, you're not going to catch me doing it.
Damn it. I wanted to...
Yeah, it's one of the things where I remember the first time I ever saw it, and I was blown away. I couldn't believe that someone would actually do that. But yeah, the purpose is to identify with what Jesus did, and understandable. The Passion story is, if you're religious, is deeply moving. You can only imagine the suffering. There's a reason why Passion of the Christ, did so well in the box office. People went to see it to identify with it.
I just thought we liked gore. I mean, that's why.
Yeah,
horror movies.
Hey, the reason why the Saw movies do so well. It's torture porn for the religious. It's Golgotha Chainsaw Massacre.
Yeah, that's what I've been calling it too.
Yeah.
There's no chance.
And it's easier to go watch it than it is to inflict it upon yourself like these people do. So that's the first thing they need is they need more movie theaters.
Well, so I guess the question, since you said it that way, the question is who has more faith, the people who go watch it or the people who go do it?
I don't know. I mean, can you measure faith?
I think so, because that's what you do at church every day.
You go to church every day?
Then my faith jar is empty because you won't catch me doing either.
Yeah. It's... Oof.
And I'm surprised that I haven't read any news stories about somebody dying doing that. And I expected that there would be, but fortunately, nobody has that I know of, or that I've read anything about. So, at least they're...
Well, there was the story when was it? It was a while back where the guy in, I want to say it was somewhere in Asia, Southeast Asia. I want to say it was Thailand, who I don't want to say crucified himself because that'd be very, very difficult to do, but was crucified and ended up dying. But who knows if it was an assisted suicide attempt or what. It was actually about a year ago. It was right around, I want to say it was around May 21st.
Yeah, which is interesting about that story is like, how did he crucify himself? Like,
Yeah.
That's just grim. But you mentioned faith. Like, faith makes you do weird things.
It does, It's the ability to detach what you're doing from any sort of, reason. If you can unplug the little cord in your brain that says, logical faculties or reason, you can do anything.
Well, I think that is a nice segue into our book recommendation for the week.
I think it is too.
The book we'd like to recommend, you can get it at www.audibletrial.com/TNRL. Go there, sign up for the 30-day free trial. You can download a free audio book. And the one we want to recommend this week is Sam Harris, The End of Faith. And,
you were mentioning that you're actually in the middle of this book. What do you think of it so far?
And it's very good. Sam Harris, I like Sam Harris a lot, but he's definitely one of those sort of new atheists that has an axe to grind. And he is very, very critical of faith. In fact, he makes the exact point that you do, Ken, where all faith is a method for turning off that switch in your brain.
Yeah. It's sort of like when you have reason, you have to deal with responsibility, but faith sort of removes that responsibility.
Yeah, I really think that Harris wrote the book as a reaction to 9/11, because the point that he makes all the time is those guys that were in those airplanes, they were men of devout and absolute faith.
Yeah.
So what's the name of the book?
That's what religion is. It's you can take away responsibility and you can pin it on someone else. It's a cosmic game of pass the buck.
Yeah, and Harris is very, very critical in it, and his arguments are very sound, and he's a good read. I think he gets maybe a little bit out of his element in it when he sort of plays philosopher, because he's not a philosopher. He's a neuroscientist. But he makes a lot of very good points when he's out of the philosophy realm.
Yeah, so, I find that's true with a lot of the atheist authors, the new atheists. Is they're great reads. They're excellent. You should definitely pick them up and read them. But sometimes I feel like they sort of step out of their element every now and then.
Well, it's okay to step out of your element. It's all right.
Yeah, it's okay. It's good to venture out. They have great points. They have great ideas that you should definitely explore. And I think this is a perfect suggestion to tie into what we're talking about today.
Yeah, maybe that green guy needed to read it.
Yeah, right.
So it's The End of Faith.
No, you should have read Origin of Species.
Sam Harris, The End of Faith, available at www.audibletrial.com/TNRL. It is there for free. It's like you paid nothing for it.
Yeah.
What a bargain.
Yeah.
So now that Easter is over, and I think you could almost set your watch by it. Like as soon as Easter's over, the news stories always circle back around to the Shroud of Turin.
Dun 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 dun.
And every year, it just seems like there's a new wrinkle or a new theory. And have you seen the newest theory now that's making the news cycle by Thomas de Wesselo?
He's writing the book, right?
Yeah, he wrote the book The Sign. I believe his book is called The Sign.
Maybe not. What's the premise?
His premise is that the shroud is authentic, in that it
Oh,
is
yes.
it is an image of Jesus after the crucifixion, and that all of Christianity is founded upon the faithful seeing the image in the shroud, and that was taken to be a sign of the resurrection.
Yeah.
And that there was no bodily resurrection of Jesus. They just saw the image in the sheet and said, "Oh, he's born again."
So wait, so now we have how many different stories?
A lot.
Yeah, I'm not even gonna count them.
And Weslow is not a scientist. He is not an engineer. He is not a theologian. He is not he's not even really a believer. He says he's agnostic, but what he is an art historian, and he makes the convoluted claim about how he makes a lot of suppositions and shows the provenance of the shroud from the crucifixion on up into 1300 AD, when it first appears as the shroud. And he says that the resurrection really wasn't. It was a metaphorical resurrection, a symbolic resurrection, not a bodily resurrection of Christ.
Well, we talked about that last week.
This guy's basing his theory on the legitimacy of the shroud too.
So, like as we said last week, if it was symbolic, if it was not a physical resurrection, it was only spiritual or symbolic, then that kicks the legs out of under Christianity.
Yeah. So this guy, like, somehow I think it's funny that Weslow has managed a theory that pisses off believers and non-believers alike.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I actually read a quick synopsis of his theory on, I want to say it was Huffington Post, like a week or two ago, and it always comes back around to the Shroud of Turin with us. And I think it's interesting. I think it's a crock.
Crocoduck?
A crocoduck. I think it's a crocoduck. No, I think it's a complete load of BS. It's speculation built on speculation, built on sort of plugging your ears and humming along, whenever evidence is presented. The Shroud is absolutely a medieval forgery, undeniably so.
Well, yeah, he's definitely in the camp where he does that thing, like you said, builds like, well, if we suppose that this was the shroud, and then we make this assumption that it was preserved at this time, and then we further assume that it was moved here at this time, and then we make one more assumption that it was kept here, then yeah, you can build that case, but that is a house of straw. I mean, really, there's no empirical evidence to support any of it. It's just assumption upon assumption upon assumption. Yeah,
I mean, you could. It's frustrating because there's nothing there to base anything on. He's saying if we assume that this is real, then we can say blah 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 blah, and therefore it's real. His conclusion is his supposition, and one relies on the other. It's just it's almost like a bad undergraduate essay. Where someone they write out what they think, then they sort of beat around what they think to bring up their conclusion and say, therefore, what I think. There's no, when there's the middle of it, there's no actual material that means anything. It's just I don't know what to call it except for sort of just an exercise in BSing. You're just beating around the bush and sort of, if you can. It's kind of like grandstanding. If you can make enough arguments that sound plausible, you don't have to bring anything of actual value to the table.
Yeah, I really think the Shroud is an interesting case study when you watch people and it seems like the camps are divided, whether you are an atheist or a Christian, or whether you're it doesn't seem to be divided on those theological grounds. It seems that if you start with the conclusion in mind, you can find your way to legitimizing the Shroud. However, if you look at evidence only about what you can prove and what you can show, then that camp is like, no, the Shroud's a fake. And
exactly,
the one discounts the evidence of the other.
Yeah, it's he starts with his conclusion and then tries to work backwards to find evidence to support it, but it's not real evidence, because if you were to bring evidence into it, you would see that it's a medieval forgery.
Yeah. All right. So here, this will really fry your brain. There is a website, and they are called. The website is called The Enigma of the Shroud of Turin, and the website is www.shroud-enigma.com. And they've issued a challenge in the vein of the James Randi Educational Foundation challenge, in the vein of like the JREF $1 Million Prize. They're offering 20,000, looks like Italian lira, or maybe pounds. I guess it's a pound. They're offering 20,000 pounds to Richard Dawkins, and their challenge is that if you choose to accept it, is to explain how the Shroud and its image might have come into existence. If you can't explain it, then you have to admit that it's real.
Yeah,
that's ass backwards. It's not like, I mean, that's like the guy going, well, I have ESP, prove that I don't.
Yeah, exactly. I'm looking at this now, and the thing is, this is. I hope they have the money to give him, because if he takes up the challenge, all this research has already been done. There are people who have reproduced passable Shrouds of Turin using, 14th and 15th century techniques.
So I just think it's funny that they have Dawkins singled out. And the thing with Dawkins is he's not an image specialist. He's not an art historian. He's a genetic biologist. He's a genetic. He just has. He's relying on the same evidence that you and I are relying on.
Yeah.
It's not like he has a research foundation that's dedicated to duplicating the Shroud of Turin. He's relying on the same evidence that you and I are relying on, and oddly enough comes to the same conclusion because he's not putting the conclusion first.
Yeah, there's no evidence to, and it looks like it was sent out just last week.
I know. They even have a little counter on. I know the site is new.
Weeks since challenge issued.
One.
Yeah.
We're really getting a lot of notice on that one. But I also did I did some more digging, and on that website page for the challenge, they say that the challenge is made possible in scientific terms by a Professor Giulio Fanti of Padua University. And I found this thing. It was like a question and answer interview with Fanti, and it doesn't say who it is, so I'm not sure how reliable it is. But Fanti is a believer who is taking a scientific view of the Shroud. However, as a believer, he's starting with the conclusion first and then shoehorning the evidence in, and he admits that in his interview. And he says that when he was around the Shroud, he has these powerful religious experiences.
Yeah. This reminds me of a conversation I've been having for the last week with someone about the historical Jesus, where this guy will bring up, oh well, what about all the work of the evidence provided by N.T. Wright or Gary Habermas or Bruce Metzger, and I say those people are believers first.
Yeah,
and
this guy,
historians, if they're historians, which most of them are not, second. They're apologists first and historians second. They have they have something in that bet. They have something to lose if they're wrong. And that's like this. You start with the conclusion first, and then you're going to try and build an argument around it. That's not how you figure things out. That's not logical thinking. And it's this guy, Professor Fanti, he's the associate professor of mechanical and thermic measurements, i.e., nothing to do with the Shroud of Turin.
Well, he's published some papers in an imaging journal, and so he is approaching it from the standpoint of I want to say personal incredulity, where he's looking at the image analysis of the shroud. It does have some unique properties, and he's like, oh well, these can't be duplicated, so it must be an enigma, and if it's an enigma, then it must be some evidence of Christ's resurrection. And if I take it as evidence of Christ's resurrection, despite all my claims of faith, now I have this piece of evidence that I can cling to.
Yeah, it's BS, because that's not how you do it. What he's doing is he's couching it in terms that are scientific. I wouldn't use the word unique to the shroud. Interesting, definitely thought-provoking, but I wouldn't call it unique, because all the aspects that people like to get behind have all been recreated.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You're right. Not unique. Unique means would be one of a kind, and other people have recreated those properties. I found a paper from another Italian scholar, and this guy is I forget what university he's from, but his name is Luigi Garlaschelli. Luigigarlaschelli, and he's a guy that has successfully reproduced the shroud, including all of its heretofore now not unique properties.
Yeah, the 3D imaging and all that. Yep. Yeah, the lack of brushstrokes, the clearly organic paints. Like I've read about him. It's fascinating. For me, growing up, I heard about the shroud. I wasn't always as sort of critical about things as I was before. I used to really love those books on like the supernatural and the unexplained, and the Shroud of Turin was always like one of those things like, wow, that's cool. But the more you learn about things, you're like, oh, it's not that special at all. I mean, it's interesting, and it's certainly I keep wanting to use the word unique, but it's not unique. It's special in that it is incredibly old. 14th century, pretty damn old.
Yeah. And so here, we're talking about like faith and evidence. If in the, what was it, like 1989, 84, whatever, when they did the radiometric dating, if that would have come back as saying, oh yeah, this was 33 AD plus or minus 50 years, everybody would have latched onto that. That would have been universally accepted as absolute proof that it was real. But they didn't get the answer they wanted, and so then they have to come up with some hand waving to discount it.
Of course, and it's one of those things where it wasn't just one place that did radiometric dating. It was done at 3 independent universities who had no connection to one another. They didn't have access to each other's results, but they all came up with around the same date, plus or minus so many years. It was always right around the 14th or 15th century.
I was
plus or minus a few years.
I was reading a guy's criticism of Garlaschelli's work, and the guy makes a comment, and I think this is like really backwards. And what he says is that he said we must realize that the modern artist and researcher knows that they have to work in such a way that they have to produce a shroud-like image with these properties, those 3D imaging and the contrast, all that other stuff. And it says, what is the probability for a medieval forger who obviously could not have had in mind these properties to produce by chance an image having exactly those properties? And they're saying 0. So that's like, that's saying that the guy who forged it in the 1300s was trying to achieve those properties that we think make it unique and special.
Yeah, unless those properties, of course, are just byproducts of the way that he did it, you know?
Of his forgery, and it just turns out it's hard to do. The guy did a really good job.
Yeah. Well, that's the interesting thing about forgery, is when you do a good forgery, no one's supposed to be able to tell.
You're right.
You know, it's...
Yeah,
you don't print your fake money on printer paper. Yeah, there obviously couldn't. The reason why there's three-dimensional imaging is because of the way that the image is layered on.
That's a weird argument to make, to say that even if a modern researcher reproduces the exact properties of the item, to say that, well, even though you reproduced it, the guy who could have forged it, he wouldn't have known that those would exist. So then, just because you reproduced it doesn't mean it's not magical.
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
really I'm having a hard time wrapping my mind around that.
It's frustrating because it wants to beat around the evidence. You know, oh, you might have defeated me, but here's why I'm still right.
Oh, man.
It's frustrating. It's one of those times where you just have to kind of like, you have to go back and then repeat yourself. Well, it's like, well, yes, but it's not magic because we can still do it. You know?
Well, maybe the
forger might not have been
magic.
striving for 3D imaging, but that's just a byproduct of how he forged it. You know? You can have aspects of something that aren't intentional.
Agreed. And I think that, and to say that because a medieval forger couldn't have known that there would be unintentional aspects is not a reason to suppose it wasn't forged.
Absolutely.
I'm really having trouble going around their doublespeak, man. It's driving me crazy, and I'm.
It's what you have to do. I mean, that's apologist stock and trade is doublespeak and sort of beating around the bush. They don't need to provide evidence; they just need to provide doubt.
Right. Yeah, and so I'm waiting for Dan Porter's emails to come flooding in.
I think he gave up on us.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I look at his site every once in a while, and I remember when I first became aware of his site, he seemed to present himself as, at worst, an agnostic, and at best, a moderate believer. And now if you look at his site, he's 100% a believer. He's even admitting it now. He's like, no, I'm taking these things on faith. He's neglecting evidence.
He's not coming on our show
to
defend the accusations he made against us.
Yeah. It's been almost a year.
Yeah. He's definitely positioned himself such that he puts the conclusion first and then works backwards.
Yeah.
Well, not on this show, because you know why? The conclusion is soon coming.
Yeah, we have at a time.
Yeah, we got to be about there. Jason?
We're getting there. Just heads up.
Okay, cool. No, the Shroud's interesting, but it's not. It's not one of those things where it's unknowable. It's very much unknowable. We've explored it, we've tested it, we've reproduced it, and now it's just people plugging their ears and humming to themselves. You can't prove that it's not real. You can't prove that it's not real.
I can prove that you're throwing shit.
You know,
Yeah, I know.
we're talking about like evidence and the convergence of arrows all pointing in the same direction. The one skeptical blogger, Ben Radford, he's talking about the Garlashelli's work in Italy, and he says even if that guy does make an accurate representation of the shroud, that doesn't necessarily mean it's forged. That's just one piece of evidence to show that it could be. There's other pieces of evidence, such as the radiometric dating that goes to the 13th century, exactly when it shows up in the historical record. And there's other evidence, like the guy admitted it was a forgery, and the Pope admitted it was a forgery.
Yeah, the Catholic Church.
None of that matters, Bob. None of that matters.
Yeah.
What is wrong with you?
In fact, the fact that the guy could duplicate it, that isn't proof. That's just lending plausibility to an argument that's already been made.
Yeah. It reminds me of people who hunt for the Loch Ness Monster now, after the guys who photographed it in the first place admitted that it was a forgery.
Oh, you're talking about the doctor's photograph?
Yeah.
That's the one with the swan neck coming out of the water.
Yep.
Yeah, that was like a toy submarine.
Yeah, that they glued something onto, and then they put it out there and took a picture of it, and then said it was real, and then decades later, I guess on the guy's deathbed, he admitted that it was a forgery. And
or how about the guys in England that do the crop circles? They were like, yeah, man, we've been doing it for years. Yeah. And everybody's like, no human could make a crop circle this accurate.
And they're like, no, let me show you.
Look, this is how I do it. I'll do it right now.
Yeah,
and
it's right.
Man.
Ignoring the evidence, starting from the conclusion and working backwards, never really seems to work.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Or the Nazca lines, they're like, no one could ever make these, and it's like, easy. You get 4 people to walk in a straight line through the dirt, and it does the same thing.
That's Joe Nickel did that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Human could have made this. Oh yeah, I'll show you.
Yeah. No, it's exactly made by humans. Just like
that's
this,
kind of that's kind of the argument that gets made for the shroud. Like, no known process that we know could have produced this image. Well, okay, right. All right, it's a tough problem, but somebody seems to have cracked it. But let's ignore it.
Yeah. Like, why would they make it if they could never look at it? I don't know. Because they thought someone was up there, Like, doesn't have to be aliens. It's just they thought their gods lived up there. They wanted to make a pretty design for them. It's like drawing your parents a picture when you're in kindergarten.
Even if you regard it as a 13th century forgery, wouldn't that make it a pious fraud, right? The guy who was forging it, he wasn't forging it to. It was in that time of relic mongering and where holy relics were everywhere, But he was like, man, I'm going to make a really good one, and he did.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There were so many pious frauds back then. I mean, church history is, absolutely rife with them. Everything from, pseudepigrapha, straight up to the relic mongering.
Yeah, what did
all
you
it
say?
takes is people being like,
pieces of the one
if this isn't
fraud?
real, then it ought to be.
Yeah,
and I'm going to make
it ought
one.
to be. It should be real.
In our Bible, the pastoral epistles, 1st and 2nd Timothy and Titus, not written by Paul, but written by someone saying, Paul didn't say this,
but he should.
God damn, he ought to have.
Yeah.
So I'm going to write it down, and I'm going to attach Paul's name to it, and I'm going to say Paul wrote it. Same thing with 2 Peter. Like 2 Peter doesn't appear in the historical record until damn near the end of the 2nd century. And someone was like, well, Peter didn't say this.
But he should have.
But he should have.
I think that's funny. I like that idea.
It happens all the time.
3 minutes.
The discourse in the Gospel of John between Pilate and Jesus during the trial. There's no way anyone could have known what Jesus said, considering he was by himself with Pilate. It's the author of John saying, well, if Jesus didn't say it, this is exactly what I imagine he would have said.
Yeah.
And then they write it in there. It's an impossible to know situation because it's just Jesus. Right before he dies.
but again, the apologist standpoint on that would be like, oh, well, it's the gospel. It's the inspired word of God. Right?
Yeah,
It's not just the word of God. It's the inspired word of God. Somebody was inspired to write this down, whether it's true or not.
Yeah, inspired
King was
by their
inspired
own
by writing all his
desire to
books.
propagate their ideas. You know?
We should be inspired to wrap it up.
Yeah.
Is it time?
Yes,
Okay.
Yeah, about that time. This was fun, though.
That was
Yeah.
happy.
You know how the
Easter.
Shroud of Turin always gets us riled up. So
Like I said, I'm waiting for the comments and the emails to come pouring in. Oh, and we did get I should have mentioned earlier. We did get a nice email from a woman who.
Yeah.
I think she was religious, although she liked she liked our examination, and she was a domestic rabbit rescue organizer. So, mom and dads, do not go and get your kids rabbits and chickens for Easter. That's the
Easter's
worst
already
decision
gone.
ever.
yeah.
But yeah, that's bad.
Such a bad idea.
But what you can do, mom and dads, if you want to send us the Shroud of Turin sleeping bags, we'll accept them.
Love that.
Anyway, wrap it
There are
up
so many
for us,
good sleeping
kid.
bags out there. It's awesome. So to wrap it up, questions, comments, Dan Porter, if you're out there and you're watching and you're getting irate looking at the screen, you can contact us via voicemail. Give us a call, 757-337-2195. You can leave us a message there. Tell us what we did wrong, what we did right. You can email us, nonreligious@zombie-popcorn.com. You can like us on Facebook and leave us comments and suggestions there, facebook.com/thisnonreligiouslife. You can put us in your circles on Google+. You can go to iTunes and find us there. Leave us feedback. You can listen to us on Stitcher Radio, which requires absolutely no downloading of the shows themselves, no syncing. You just listen to it live, on the go, whenever. It's great. Which car company is it now has Stitcher built in, Jason?
Ford and BMW.
Ford and BMWs. So if you have a Ford or BMW car, it's new, Stitcher Radio is automatically built in. Just listen to the show. Especially if you have a long commute. If you live here in Los Angeles like I do, the commute's terrible. Getting 2 miles down the road is going to take you about the time it takes for us to get through an episode. And of course, you can go to zombie-popcorn.com. You can sign up for the mailing list and get all the information about this show and all the other shows that we do. It's great once a week. Jason puts it together. It's beautiful. And, it's definitely something to look forward to. With that, I think that's just about it. You guys have anything else?
That's it.
All right. Well, we'll see you next week.
All right,
Next
bye.
week. Bye.